Hello again, it's me, Thomas Renee, head of voice and speech at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts and the founder and CEO of the kineticfoundry.com. Today's video is for those Korean viewers out there, people who speak Korean, are learning or have learned English, and you're working on sounding more like you're based in the United States, working on that general American accent. I always have to say it's a contentious, debated term. That's what people seem to call it. So I'm going to keep calling it for now for ease of communication. So if you're working on that general American accent, I want to talk about a very specific point that might be happening for you. I feel like people don't talk about it ever. I think it's not a small issue. It actually has a massive weight to it, but I think it passes people's ear, and it's one of those situations where people go, I'm not exactly, something's off there. I don't know what it is. And I tripped upon it myself, and I was really shocked when I started to really compare the two languages, Korean and English. And so I want to talk about it. There's a lot to this, so sorry if the video gets a little lengthy, but I'll try and keep it condensed. Yeah, I want to break apart some concepts of specifically P and B. What do these mean? P and B, and how those appear in both languages, and why there might be not necessarily confusion, but why some Korean tendencies might slip into your English, and why that might cause some communication breakdowns or just someone to flag their ear a little bit. So let's take a look at that. I'm about to share my whiteboard, but I think what I want to say is that in Korean, we have three very separate concepts of P. I'm even saying that, and I'm just so conscious that it's my own United States tongue that's making, or not tongue, my lips that are making that sound. But we have three separate concepts. In English, I mean, I think it's really discussed that we have one. I think we really have like two probably. But we do not have the distinctions that you might have in Korean. And I think that's really important. We really should look at that. And within that, I also want to look at the voice b, 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 that we have in English, because it's often talked about that you have something like that in Korean, but I don't actually think you do. And so I think there's these underground kind of misconceptions about these sounds. I just want to clear up some details right now. So I'm going to share my whiteboard and let's do this thing. Okay, so if we start on the left side of the screen, specifically, I want us to just notice that I'm working with English T and English duh. And that's my kind of target goals for you today, but then looking at what's happening in Korean here. So let's go over to Korean for a second. That's on the right side of the screen. And I want you to notice three different words here. Right? As always, please forgive my Korean pronunciation, but also tear me to bits if you want to. So we have something like dal, something like dal, and something like tal. Now, this took me a long time. As someone born in the United States, raised speaking English, English really is the only language I can claim to speak. To hear these three words said for the first 1 million times, I could not distinguish those first sounds. So if you're a viewer who speaks Korean, is raised speaking Korean, you're just like, no, those are completely three separate things. I just kind of, on the other side of the tracks here, I want you to realize that for us, we're like, it's all the same thing. What's going on? That being said, I think there are these distinctions that might be crossing over that we need to break apart. And if you're a person who's not spoken Korean before or has much exposure to Korean, you might be thinking they sound very, very similar. So let's talk about these differences. What I'd actually like to start with is the bottom right here. Tal. And again, sorry for my pronunciation if it's not exactly right, but something that I want to point out is this first symbol in the word and how it represents this this sound with the tongue coming up to that gum ridge behind the teeth and exploding away from the gum ridge with lots of breath. T, 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 tan, tan, tan. I would then like to actually jump to the first one. I organized these in the wrong way, but I'd like to jump to the first one and notice that you have a different symbol here that represents a slightly different sound. It's very similar to what we just had, except we don't have that explosion of breath. Dan, dan, dan. Now, what I think is really interesting is often I've seen people when they try to write kind of I'm trying to think of what you call it. When they try to write a version of the Korean word with English letters, they often represent this symbol with a D, like we have in here in the word dough. What I think is kind of not problematic, I'm making it very dramatic, but what I think is wrong with that is actually this sound in the word tal is not voiced, where I think when we start to use this letter, this symbol, lowercase d, it really is suggesting that there's a lot of activation at the vocal folds themselves. Duh, 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 dal, dal, dal. But that doesn't seem to be what we're getting from Korean speakers. Dal, dal, dal. It's actually a voiceless sound that's minus the aspiration. And because it doesn't have the aspiration to, say, ears like mine, I start to think it sounds like it's voiced. But I think that's a very, very, very specific and necessary distinction. And I'm going to talk more about that in a second. Then what I'd like to do is come to the middle one here. And that's represented with this symbol. And we get a slightly different realization of kind of the same action. What I've realized over time, or my understanding of it, is that it's kind of the same action, except the tongue tenses. The tongue actually contracts a little bit. It doesn't just press a little harder against the ridge, but the tongue itself kind of hardens and contracts, creating a little bit of extra energy, a little extra tension. And then when it explodes away from that ridge behind the teeth, it adds what we call the tense T, dal, dal. So it holds and it tenses and then it explodes in a little bit more of a strict, a little bit more of a structured way. And so we get those three differences between the non-aspirated or the no extra air in the dal. We get the tense, the extra energy in the tongue for the dal. And then we get lots of extra air after the explosion in tal. Okay, so hopefully it seems to be true for those kind of going along with this, especially with my terrible Korean pronunciations. But now let's look at how that either translates or does not actually translate into English. Or maybe I should use the word transfer, not translate. It might be clearer to say. What I'd like to offer is that, let's start with, I think, the easier ones. That I would like to clearly say that this explosion with lots of air can be directly transferred to situations where T starts the word, like in tea, or my name, Tom. That we can take the explosion off the ridge behind the teeth with all this extra air. So we get this after the T, and go right into the vowel T, T, T. Beautiful. Now, what I kind of want to say, not kind of, what I do want to say is, if I'm a Korean speaker and I'm taking these other two situations, whether the unaspirated T onto D, or the tense one onto D, then I'm not actually getting the sound that we would find from a US-based English speaker. So we want to make sure that we have that extra breath that's coming off of that explosion t, t, into the vowel there, T, T. And I would say that is absolutely an accurate realization of that sound and something that matches what we're going to be finding for those United States English-based speakers. United States-based English speakers, that's what I should say. Now, when we come to the voicing, such as in the word dough, we're getting the same action really between t, 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 and d, d, d. The only difference is that this the D has the vocal folds involved creating voicing. What I often find is that for Korean speakers, because we don't actually have a D sound in Korean, you start to borrow either the unaspirated T or the tense T. I find especially that you start to bring in the tense T without adding the vocal folds, without adding the voicing. And even though it doesn't seem like it's such a big deal, by adding the tension of the tongue to the T, or to the T in place of this D, you're actually setting extra tension in the tongue that is going to make the rest of your accent, the rest of your English speech, a little bit, well, it's just going to add to the Korean accent, the thing that you're trying to work away from. And so even though it's such a small detail, it's not only going to have an effect on your D sound, but it's going to have an effect on the vowel afterwards. It has effect on many other consonants that our ear is going, something's off there. Where are you from? I'm still hearing that slight accent. So how do we get to this United States-based English D when we don't have it, or D when we don't have it in Korean? The way in that I've been finding, and hopefully this works for you, and let me know, is we first come to an unstressed, an unaspirated da, dal, 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 dal. Now that initial da, da, da is not as voiced as we need it. Even though some of us might think it sounds voiced, what's really happening is it's unvoiced, and then the vowel is coming in so quick that it really brings the voicing right next to that unvoiced consonant. And so it makes that consonant seem to be voiced. But what we're going to really not be able to hear, or what we're actually, it's going to bother our ear a little bit and go, that accent is still there, is that the voicing is coming close to the consonant. It's not coming on the consonant. So if you're able to give me that dal, 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 and really feel how you're making that first consonant, da, 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 then what I'd like you to do is keep it there. Don't add any tension. Don't bring it to dal, but keep it on dal, dal, dal. And then see if you can add a little bit more voicing during the closure of the consonant. Duh, 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 duh. And this is where it's going to get tricky, that your extra energy in that sound is not coming, I'm going to repeat that, not coming from the tension of the tongue, which we might find in this word. It's coming from the actual voicing that you're feeling, or that you're doing, I don't know if you're feeling it, but that you're doing in the vowel afterwards. Can you get that voicing from the vowel right into that first sound? So instead of da, da, dal, can we get duh, duh, duh? And then can you bring that into do? If you need a little bit more of a structured exercise, what I would say is actually start with the tense so that you can feel what the tension is, so you know not to do it. Start with the dal, move to the dal, see if you can add more voicing to the duh, bring it on to the English word, whatever the word is, but in this case, do. I hope that's helpful. I hope that made sense. That's my understanding of what's going on for a lot of people. Again, I don't think it's something that's in people's faces and it's like, oh, that's really wrong. That's the thing that's adding to your accent. But it's a small detail that I think has massive effects, and not only with that T and D, but it has other lasting effects within other sounds within your speech. So again, let me know how that goes. Yeah, that's all I got for you. So I hope that's helpful, and I'll talk to you guys soon. Thanks. Keep practicing. Bye.